Before I get started, I need to read a statement off and ask for a motion. The meeting of the steering committee for April is being conducted electronically pursuant to Governor Lee's Executive Order 16. I would ask for a motion that conducting the meeting electronically is necessary to protect public health, safety, and welfare in the light of the coronavirus. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I got a motion, Commissioner McAdoo, second by Commissioner Rather. All right, gentlemen, let's get to our agenda.
You have to vote.
You're right, and everything will be a roll call, so go ahead, Rachel.
Commissioner Irvin?
Yes.
Commissioner Cush?
Yes.
Commissioner McAdoo? Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yes.
Commissioner Rather?
Yes.
Chairman Harris?
Yes. Next thing on our agenda is approve the minutes. Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I have read over the minutes, and everyone has a copy of those minutes. I move that they be approved.
I second it. Irvin?
We have a motion, and we have a second by Commissioner Irvin. Rachel?
Commissioner Cush?
Approved.
Commissioner McAdoo? Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yes.
Commissioner Rather?
Yes.
Commissioner Irvin?
Yes.
Chairman Harris?
Yes. Okay, continuing on the agenda. Next thing on our agenda is appointment for Board of Equalization. We shared the applications with you on SharePoint. We have 6 openings and we have 4 applications. They are Dan Alcorn, Della Goodman, Greg Tucker, and Shelby Hutton, and these are reapplying. So do we have a motion?
So moved.
Commissioner Rather, a second.
Second, Commissioner Irvin.
Commissioner Irvin. Is there any discussion? All right, gentlemen, to approve these for the county commission, go ahead, Rachel.
We'll do all 4 together, or 3.
Is there any problem with doing all 4 together?
No.
All right,
No.
Rachel.
Commissioner Cush?
Aye on all 4.
What did he say?
Yes.
Commissioner Allen? Commissioner McAdoo?
Yes, all 4.
Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Irvin?
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yes.
Commissioner Rather?
Yes.
Chairman Harris?
Yes. Okay, to the next. We need to appoint Jimmy Davis to the Central Tennessee Solid Waste Planning Board. Do we have a motion?
So
I have
moved.
Commissioner
a couple
Rather?
of questions.
Go ahead, Commissioner Stevens.
I looked over the application that was on the SharePoint website, and there really wasn't much on there about solid waste. I was wondering if the gentleman was there or could address what his qualifications were for this board.
I don't
This
have
is like
anybody
the
here,
biggest
Commissioner
issue facing
Stevens.
I'm sorry, this is like the biggest issue facing our county, and I want to be sure that we have somebody on here that's a heavy hitter in this area or somebody that's been really engaged with the process. And I was kind of concerned about the lack of information on there about solid waste. In fact, I believe it said that the reason this person was applying or being put forward was to save money on county buildings. And I would just like some clarification on that.
Well, Mr. Davis is not here, so what we can do is table it off till, delay it till next month so he can be here and answer your questions.
Does the commission either appoint this or is it the mayor that appoints it?
The mayor appoints. We had to approve his appointment.
Mr. Chair, this is Mike Cush.
Go ahead.
Do you know if somebody has vacated the current spot and why?
Yes, it needed to be filled. We filled
Because there's typically only, I think, 3 people that are appointed to this body, and I'm wondering if somebody has left.
Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Bill Ketchum, Mayor. We have 2 appointments. This is on the Regional Solid Waste Board. 2 appointments made by the mayor in each one of the counties that make up the region board. I think it's probably 6 or 7, maybe 8 counties that make up that Regional Solid Waste Board. They meet on a quarterly basis. The last appointment that I made was Donna Barrett. Actually, before we found that out, Mac Nolan came to me and told me that we didn't have anybody representing us other than himself, and we probably needed 2 other people. We have one that's Mac, and he'd been the only one attending, and for several years we didn't have the 2 slots filled because nobody wanted to do it. And Donna Barrett accepted sometime back in the fall, and then Jimmy Davis came to me. He basically works in the construction business, industrial business. Basically, he's a supplier for Toyota, Nissan, Hyundai. He does a lot of wiring harnesses, et cetera. So he does a lot of industrial waste and has those connections. And basically, he volunteered to accept the position and work with Ms. Rowland, or Barrett, excuse me, and on behalf of the county. He's also on the Public Building Authority.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I would recommend confirmation because the next quarterly meeting is coming up sometime soon.
Mr. Stevens, is that good?
Did anybody reach out to like Susan Allen or Steve Bauman or anybody that's been holding these town hall meetings and really getting engaged with the issue? I mean, they would be excellent choices, or other maybe citizens out there that are really studying this and giving us recommendations.
I'm sorry. No one applied. Did we advertise it, Rachel?
As of right now, nobody has applied for it, Commissioner Stevens. But if you would like, I'll be more than glad to announce this and keep it open till next, and for the next meeting. But you have to understand, we have a quarterly meeting coming up, and we need to get somebody in there.
Well, I don't want to hinder progress, but another concern I have is that this person is apparently now Mayor Ketchum's campaign treasurer. And I just don't think that gives a good appearance to the public. I would like to reach out to Susan Allen or Steve Bowman or one of those individuals to see if any of their group would be interested in helping.
That'll be fine.
All right. Well, on the agenda, we are appointing Jimmy Davis. Is there a motion to approve Jimmy Davis for this position?
Mr. Chairman, Michael Rather.
Go ahead, Commissioner. I can't hear you.
I make a motion to approve, as we've discussed way back when in the steering committee, because we were struggling with finding people willing to serve. And not only do we have an applicant who's willing to serve, I don't know Mr. Davis very well, but I know him well enough to say he's got some common sense. And that's why I made the motion to approve to begin with. Now, if I withdraw that motion, and Mr. Stevens, we want to continue it on next month. If I didn't know Mr. Davis as well as I do, it's not real well, I would have never made that motion to approve it.
We have a motion on the table. Do I have a second? I have a second, Commissioner McAdoo. Gentlemen, the motion is, do we appoint Jimmy Davis to the Solid Waste Committee? Rachel?
Are we still open for debate?
Absolutely. I apologize. Yes.
This is Commissioner Cush. Is it indeed true that Mr. Davis is the campaign manager of Mayor Ketron?
Yeah, that is true. Matter of fact, that was just done last week because I had to after the hearing, but he probably won't continue to be in that position. I had to find someone that I could trust. Also, this was done before he had volunteered probably a month ago to come onto this committee before I even appointed Mr. Davis as my campaign manager. Not my campaign manager, but basically the treasurer for my PAC, which is getting ready to be dissolved, and also my Senate re-elect campaign, which is going to be dissolved as well.
All right. I
Ms.
guess-
Barrett wanted somebody that she knew and wouldn't mind riding with her because these meetings rotate from one county to another, McMinnville. Next time it'll be in Lebanon, et cetera. And she wanted somebody that she knew and wouldn't mind riding at night to a meeting in Warren County.
All right. I guess the question would be, would the headlines in the DNJ freak everybody out that we have appointed one of the mayor's financial advisors or campaign managers to a board? So if the mayor's saying that Mr. Davis is about to step down or that campaign is about to dissolve, then that brings new light on the situation. So I guess if we have the mayor's word that he is no longer going to be associated with the campaign, that makes me feel a little better than probably the rest of Rutherford County. So if that is the case, Mayor, then I feel a little better about the vote.
Sure.
Okay, anybody else? All right, gentlemen. Rachel?
Commissioner Irvin,
Yes.
Commissioner Cush,
Yes.
Commissioner McAdoo. Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens,
No.
Commissioner Rather,
Yes.
Chairman Harris.
Yes. All right, before I get to the employee policy, I want to let the mayor speak as far as what the county's doing to deal with the virus. Gentlemen, I want to thank all y'all because it's real easy to cancel these meetings, but I believe that local government has to continue to function, and everybody has to see that we're continuing to deal with all problems, not just one. But before I get to the policy, I want the mayor to give a little bit brief, Mayor, about what's going on with the virus and what our county response is, as far as your administration as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, you have before you a policy and procedure. It's in the manual of how we deal with epidemics and pandemics. It talks about the definition of an epidemic. Pandemic influenza is defined. It talks about employees who become ill, employees who become ill at work, employees who are not ill, family members, dependent, paid leave, et cetera. Any changes to attendance, all that information is before you. Let me brief you on where we are today. Recently, as of 4:30 this afternoon, I was able to sign a contract and talking early this morning, first thing this morning with Chairman Pettis over Public Safety and Chairman Robert P. to get their blessings, even though I didn't need that. I have the emergency power, but I wanted to ensure that both chairmen were involved in this decision. But at the request of EMA and EMS and Fire and Rescue, we were able to secure 10,000 masks that will be coming our way. FedEx is picking those up in California. They're E91 masks, or R91 masks, that are going to be sent our direction. What's that? N95s, I'm sorry. Wrong alphabet letter. N95 masks that are being sent to us.
Okay, back, get out of here.
I'm sorry. Who wanted to speak? Somebody interrupted. Go ahead, Mayor.
Okay, so we've got the N95 mask heading our way, which makes Chris Clark feel much, much better, along with Cuz, making sure that all of our first responders are protected properly. We're trying to make another deal on gowns for them as well, but the most important thing, we're getting the N95 mask secured, and so they should be drop shipped here to us. Also, we had an issue that we needed to discuss, and that was on securing some reefer trucks. The problem is the forensic facility in Nashville is full. They can't process enough of autopsies. We average about 21 per month outside of the COVID-19 problem. So between suicides, overdoses from drugs, et cetera, that's our average. Stones River has about 2 drawers, cooling drawers. Same thing for St. Thomas Rutherford has about 2. And them being full, we're having to take action to secure some reefer trucks. And those are required this afternoon, that we'll have to, until things ease up in Nashville, and we can get those bodies that come from Rutherford County processed in Nashville. I think all the city fathers came together last Friday. We did a public service announcement. We're all together with all 5 mayors, the county and the 5 city mayors. We're all working together. All of our POs are working and messaging the same message, telling people to stay in. These next 2 weeks are going to be the toughest for all of us as this thing peaks, somewhere between the 16th and 18th, maybe the 20th. But that's only the peak. So, you know, you got to come down off that peak. So that could run us on into next month. So we just have to be vigilant and focused on what we're doing and trying to protect everyone as possible. We've got volunteers in all different sectors, from PAWS to school cafeterias, et cetera. We were able to acquire 29 no-touch thermometers that are going to be used. This is the week after spring break. So we've got 21 locations where free and reduced lunches are going to be served from our different schools, and they needed that protection. And we've got 2,200 cases of gloves that have been donated to us as of this afternoon that are coming in. They're restaurant grade gloves for how many? 2,000 cases? Okay. So it's just kind of all hands on deck what we're doing for this issue, but I just ask you all to keep us in mind as we head into the budgeting process. Most of the budgets have been turned in. We're still waiting on IT and maintenance. Those are kind of the last 2. But be prepared to make some tough decisions in the next 60 days dealing with our budgets. Our sales tax revenue, as you can imagine, are going to be wrecked because of the number of people who are collecting unemployment. It's just not good. Any questions for me?
Are there any questions for the mayor? All right, gentlemen, we're going to move on to the COVID-19 employee policy. We have Sonia, and she's going to explain the policy, and I'll open it up for any questions after that. Sonia?
Okay, thank you. So on your iPads or on your screen, you should have two different sections. One is a policy, which is pandemics, policy number 506, and then the other one is an attendance requirement, and that's a temporary policy. The policy 506, which is under the policy and procedure manual for epidemics and pandemics, I crafted the policy and then sent it to Nick Christensen for review, and he and I discussed some of the items in here. We made it a policy that's broad-based, but then where we could, depending on the situation, like for COVID-19, it would be different than if we had a major tornado that comes through, or a different type virus. Maybe there's a different type virus, the avian bird flu or something that we've had in the past, that we would be able to draft temporary policies to address whatever that situation is. In the policy that we created, it outlines how it would be handled, which would be a case-by-case basis based on the situation. It may change as the needs of the crisis changes. It talks about employees who become ill while they're actively employed, employees who may become ill while they're at work, how we would address that, employees who are not ill but they're wanting to make sure that they stay healthy and well. If a family member or a dependent of the employee becomes ill, how we would address that situation. It discusses the paid leave, which there's several different ways our employees get paid for paid leave. One would be their sick time, any accrued and unused sick leave they have available, compensatory time that they've accrued, annual time. Additionally, under our FMLA policies, anybody who's on an approved FMLA would, even if they were unpaid, would be able to continue receiving their benefits as long as they paid the employee's portion of the premium. So that's outlined as well. Talks about the changes to attendance and sick leave policies whenever we're facing a pandemic or an epidemic, and that's where the temporary policy comes in. Next, it discusses alternate working conditions. We've tried to outline several different types of ways that our employees could continue to work, whether it be in the office, telecommuting. Our IT department has worked very closely with all the departments, and any of their key personnel who could continue the operations in each office by telecommute was set up either through their own home computer or through a county computer. Also, we've discussed staggered work shifts, so it may be that one part of the employee population work an earlier shift and the other work a later shift, so that it limits the number of employees that are in an office environment. That would help cut down on either cross-contamination or exposure. The other is teleconferences, which is what we're doing right now. We have set up our meetings to where we could teleconference. We could do it via Skype. We could do it via Zoom, through Teams, which is, I think, is what we're using this evening. Also, it talks about the infection control measures. Those are things that is where we've talked about using Kleenexes, your hand sanitizer, washing your hands frequently. We have put up posters and all the different things that we needed to make sure that it's an awareness, teaching people to make sure that we have the right tools in place. The next one is a medical information inquiries and examinations. Anytime you have an epidemic or a pandemic, this does change how the federal government rules on HIPAA compliance. While in most situations, we're always going to try to protect the employees' health records, but there may be a need in a pandemic or epidemic for the elected official, the director, or supervisor to know if the employee has a fever, which is where the CDC has come in and the federal government has come in and says, you know, employers could take their employees' temperature as they enter the building. So there are some changes that are made in line with that are approved by the federal government. The next thing it discusses is travel. You know, if someone has a conference that's out of state and we find ourselves in the middle of an epidemic or pandemic, how would we address that? Also, asking our employees not to travel while we're in the middle of a crisis situation. Obviously, we wouldn't want somebody on an airplane or doing a bus or those type things and then coming back in, especially if they're in a heavily contaminated area or where they have high case counts of a virus related to a pandemic or an epidemic. So we discussed that. We discussed what the policy violation looks like. You would never want to terminate anybody when you're going through a crisis, but you still have to have rules in place to make sure that people are adhering to them and that they're being honest and forthcoming with the information that they're giving us. We wouldn't want employees to be dishonest about telling us that they have the virus, just like we wouldn't want somebody to be dishonest about they've been tested, but they really haven't, just because they don't want to come into work. So we have to put some things in place to make sure that we keep people following the rules. The next thing is an outline, item N, which is on page 3, talks about guidelines for the elected officials, directors, and department heads during a pandemic, how they should respond if they had questions, who they should go to, how to arrange sick time, you know, talking about making sure that an employee's workspace is their workspace, how it's sanitized, that we don't share phones, we don't share equipment, just to make sure that we're not, that we're limiting any exposure. The very last page, it discusses guidelines for employees during a pandemic, how they should protect themselves, what they should do to make sure that they're taken care of, and that the awareness and the responsibility they have to let their supervisor know if they're experiencing a fever or they have other symptoms. The last is the guidelines for human resources, the things that we need to make sure that we provide the employees, whether it's instructions on how to properly take care of themselves, guidelines. In fact, I set out some guidelines today for how employees could discuss what we're going through right now with their children. You know, this is a scary time for adults, but it's equally as scary for young children to be listening to the news, knowing that their parents are stressed, knowing that they're uncertain about what's going on. So send out some tools for the parents to be able to use to give have conversations with their kids in a way that would not make it so scary for them. But there's also other things that we provide, is recommendations to make sure for vaccinations, places to get vaccinations tested, other ways to make sure that they're protecting themselves, if there's medical screening available. And then also, as we make changes to policies or changes in programs as a result of the pandemic or epidemic, that we're clearly communicating that with all of the departments so that they have an awareness. So that's a brief overview of the 4-page policy. And at this point, if anybody has any questions before I move on to the temporary, I'll be happy to answer those for you.
Any questions? Continue.
Okay, the next attachment is the temporary attendance and leave requirements for the coronavirus. This is specific to COVID-19. These will run through April 1st through April 19th. Mayor Ketron met with his health department, the ambulance service, myself, finance, several of the departments, to talk about how we make sure that we're keeping our employees healthy, but we're maintaining operations for the citizens who we represent. So there are several things that we've done. Employees are still required to report to work in one form or another. Some of the employees, in order to do a limited staff, some of them are working home one week and then coming into the office the next week. They still have to make themselves available, either telephonically. All of our employees can access their email through the internet, but then we also have access to their desktop at home. And so those employees that have access to do that are working telework electronically, and then the next week they will come into the office and swap out with someone else. The other things that we're doing is staggering some work shifts, alternate days, those type things, to make sure that employees are limiting the exposure to one another. When you have an office filled with people, that just heightens your risk. We've also limited the access of the public to our employee population. We're trying to handle as many of the situations, whether it be a call or a concern, or to handle just basic business operations via phone, email, fax, however they can get it to us. We've done Skype with some people just to make sure that we're answering all their questions and that we're still taking care of business. So all of our offices are still functional and operational and interacting with the public and also the employees of the county on a daily basis. Any individual who may be at home, working from home this day, they are on call in the event that someone gets sick or we have a higher volume of customers and business functions that we need to complete for that day, then they know they're on call and should be called back into the office. Any employees who are working from home and are working in the office in that environment are still being paid, and so they are performing work, and therefore that's why they're being required to be on call as well. Under the federal guidelines, beginning April 20th, the federal guidelines for the Family First Act that went into place, we already have all those forms out to all the departments in the county. We have explained it to all the elected officials and the directors of the county so that they understand how to utilize the form, and we have already begun accepting applications. I believe we have like 12 applications already for the advanced emergency leave. Anybody who doesn't qualify under those 6 options and they're the Family First are still eligible for FMLA, and we're still accepting those applications as well. So this covers all of the emergency plans that we have in place as of right now through the 19th. Should the situation change and we believe that there's a need to continue for additional weeks or to do something different, the mayor, then under this new policy that we've created, would be able to do that and still manage the operations of the county. Are there any questions related to the emergency?
Sonia, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So currently, right now, how many county employees do we have at home, sick or taken off?
Okay, if you're talking about sick as relates to,
That are not at their job, how many people have we considered non-essential that won't be working?
well, all of our employees, even, so when you say non-essential, that's relevant to the department. You know, we have essential departments such as the sheriff's office and ambulance. That's one set of essentials. Then you think of the other essentials, you've got to keep, you know, your money flowing, you've got to keep insurance. So every department has essential employees in order. We want to make sure our fee offices are still, has somebody there. That's an essential to keep our revenues coming in, to make sure that the bills are paid and those type things. Of the employees who are out sick, who have either had a medical issue prior to this, the COVID-19, or have taken off sick, we've got
No, I'm not talking, what I'm talking
Okay.
about is how many employees has the county sent home? Like, I know that county clerk's office has half its staff working, so my question is, how many people are not working?
Well, that would vary by department depending on their operations. Like, I have one employee in my office. Of the 5 of us, 1 of them are working from home right now. The other, I have another employee in my office that was already out on an FMLA, and so she's not part of this, so I've got one
Yeah,
out.
but to answer his question, we don't have
Don't
that
know,
count.
yeah.
We don't
Yeah,
have a
sorry.
count. They haven't notified us who all they have sent home. We gave them that authority to go to limited staff last week, but we don't have a count on that, do you, Sonia?
No, sir.
Okay,
I'm sorry,
all
I
right.
guess I should have just said it
That's-
that way.
But my point is that the department heads can send people home at their discretion. It doesn't necessarily you
That-
have over their department.
That is, especially our constitutionals.
Exactly.
That's
So
correct. That's
I just
correct.
want to make sure everybody understands that. Is there any questions, gentlemen?
I have a question.
Commissioner Stevens?
On the first page of the policy and procedure manual, it defines epidemic and pandemic influenza. Should that be just epidemic and pandemic in general without mentioning the flu?
Where do you see, are you talking about in item B where it's talking about epidemic and pandemic influenza as defined? Is that where you're
That's
talking?
right.
Okay, yes, we can remove that. Typically, most of the pandemics that we researched are related to some type of a flu symptoms, whether it's like the avian bird flu, which is what I mentioned before. Most of them are flu-like issues. That's why it was listed as an influenza. But we can adjust that if you'd like.
I just want to be sure that it covers anything and not just the flu-related issue.
Right. I will take care of that for you.
Anybody else? Mayor?
I'm not sure, we probably need to get a better definition on flu, because swine flu was the same thing as this. It was all.
Right, so was SARS.
A coronavirus. SARS was a flu as well, and they're all in the same family. I think we should caution there before we
I'll
need to get a
research it.
medical decision on that.
So you will be addressing this, Sonia?
Yes, sir, I will research it. I
So
do think it's
Commissioner
like,
Stevens has a point, so I want to make sure his point gets addressed.
yes, sir.
Okay, is there any more? Any questions before I move on? All right, gentlemen, let's go to the next agenda. I'm sorry.
Have to be voted on so that it becomes part of our policies.
My understanding is discussion only.
Discussion only. Okay.
Discussion only. All right, gentlemen, let's move on to the next
Chairman
item.
Harris,
Excuse me?
Chairman Harris, this is Nick Christensen.
Yeah, Nick, I'm sorry.
It's all right. It may be better because of the circumstances that we're in, if this needs to get enacted, then the steering committee may want to make a recommending motion to approve this subject to the change raised by Mr. Stevens, so that this can get in the books, because who knows how long this current pandemic may last. You might want to get your policy in there sooner rather than later.
Okay, gentlemen, do we have a motion to send this to the full commission to be accepted?
So moved.
Commissioner
Second.
Kush, do we have a second?
Second, Michael Rather.
Commissioner Rather? Any discussion? Rachel?
Commissioner McAdoo? Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Kush?
Yes.
Commissioner Irvin?
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yes.
Commissioner Rather?
Yes.
Chairman Harris?
Yes. All right, let's move to the next thing on the agenda. It's committee qualifications. This was, subject was brought up last meeting, I apologize. And what this is we're looking at recommended qualifications. We're not saying that, I'm not saying that, either you had this or this is what I would like to see as recommended guidelines for when we are appointing people to boards. I reached out to all the chairmen, and these are the qualifications that came back from them, and I had sent this to you, so you should have it in front of you. I personally believe that for us to be the kind of county that we want it to be, we got to have some quality people up there. Now, I understand that some people, we get in a situation where there's 3 open spots and we have 1 applicant. And I'm not saying that these had to be mandatory, but I'm saying I'd like for this commission to see these qualifications before they're making their decision. I understand the needs of the county to fill these spots overweigh the recommendations at times, so I do understand that. But I'd like discussion on how you feel about these qualifications that came to us from the chairmen of these boards. None? Do we have a motion to bring these qualifications and bring them to the county, to the full commission? Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Rather?
Rather.
Yes, sir.
We talked about this in the very beginning. You know how I feel about it. And as long as this criteria, and I've looked over all of them, is not exclusive, and we can go beyond that and nominate somebody, I'm okay with it. We had an issue where nobody was willing to serve, and we had the discussion if they're willing then we ought to let them serve. But I'm okay with the list that came out of qualifications, and I think it's a great list. It's a good place to start, but I'm glad to hear that that's not exclusive. If they don't meet the criteria, they don't get nominated. And if that's the case, then I'll make the motion to approve that.
Yes, Commissioner Rather, kind of what I want to do with this is if we do have multiple applications like we did with the IDB board, I want to make sure that this committee and the steering committee, as well as the commissioners, look at these recommended guidelines and try to use these to make the right pick and the most qualified for the positions that we have open. We have several that are coming open, and I do understand your point as far as, people not applying or people not wanting to get involved. So I challenge the chairman of each one of these committees to find us the people that we need and to make sure that we have the most qualified people that we can. These are just recommended guidelines. They are not mandatory in any way whatsoever. I have a motion by Commissioner Rather to bring this to the full commission. Do I have a second?
I second it.
Commissioner Reed, a second. Is there any discussion?
And Chairman, this is Mike Cush. Again, I think
Commissioner
the
Cush,
wording
go
should be, These are recommendations that are preferred but not required.
That is correct, sir. It's kind of like us. It's kind of like a blueprint for what we need to look for and what we hope for in applicants. But I do want to stress it is recommended guidelines, not mandatory. So I have a motion from Commissioner Rather. I have a second from Commissioner Reed. Any more discussion? Rachel?
Commissioner Cush,
Yes.
Commissioner Allen McAdoo, Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens,
Yes.
Commissioner Irvin,
Yes.
Commissioner Rather,
Yes.
Chairman Harris.
Yes. Next thing on the agenda is your litigation list. Gentlemen, it was on your SharePoint. Is there any questions considering this list?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Rather?
it's been brought up that we are aware of settlements, and we've already talked about that. And in thinking about that, I would like to, I understand that, but when I look at the litigation list every month, I don't know what's going on. I don't know, it gives a brief statement as to the where we are, but I would almost like to maybe once a quarter go into executive session and allow the full commission to talk about or ask questions or have a discussion about every case or any case anybody wants to talk about. And, I look at it from a commission standpoint, legislative standpoint, where we've got lawsuits. We'll always have lawsuits. But at the same time, a list, and we vote on it and move on to next month, and we vote on it and move on, without the commission having an ability or the privilege, and in my mind, a responsibility to be able to ask questions and, ask Mr. Christensen or whoever's involved, whatever questions we have. So, I'd like the discussion. If at least once a quarter, not every month, but maybe once a quarter, that we go into that executive session and at least have the ability to have that discussion. I like to hear from others.
Well, Are you wanting, let's see if I can understand you. So are you wanting to get all the commissioners together so that you can hear their opinion instead of having a one-on-one with Nick Christensen or the mayor?
Well, yes. I think it starts here at this committee. And maybe the commission wants to vote on it, but at least once a quarter in a commission meeting, full commission meeting, that we go into executive session and at least commissioners have the opportunity to go over each one of them and maybe they have some questions, because I look over this list sometimes and I have some questions. Now, it may be that I'm supposed to call Nick or I'm supposed to talk to the mayor or whatever, but I think an open, not public, but executive session, open commission meeting to allow the commission to ask any questions or get some clarification, at least know what's going on. Because you own a business, I own one. There's people that have responsibilities that require them to know what's going on. And I think as a commission, we should know what's going on. I think we get a piece of paper that shows a list of litigation and a brief statement where we are on it, but there still may be questions.
Okay, Commissioner Rather, I suggest what we can do is I will get with Nick Christensen and I will get with the mayor. And what we'll do is I'll discuss with them if we're able to do this. And then on our next meeting for May, we'll put it on the agenda for discussion. And is that okay with you?
Sure.
All right.
I just wanted to bring the discussion up.
We'll put it up for discussion on the, I want to get more insight from Nick and the mayor, but, before we start discussing, because we have no idea. And I'll be more than glad to put that on the agenda for May. Is there any more discussion on this? All right. Is there any other business? Therefore, if there's no other business, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Commissioner Rather, second.
Second.
Commissioner Irvin. Roll call,
Pettis.
roll vote. You gotta do
I
it.
did. Pettis, Reed.
Commissioner Reed, second.
Commissioner Irvin? Commissioner Irvin?
Yes.
Commissioner Cush? I think he Commissioner Allen McAdoo? Yes. Pettis Reed? Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yes.
Commissioner Rather?
Yes.
Chairman Harris?
Yes. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your patience with me. Thank you so much, and we're adjourned.